What up, friends? This heat's making me gloomy, and today we're going to be reviewing I Don't Know How But They Found Me's newest album, GLOOM Division. This is the second album overall by American indie pop solo project I Don't Know How But They Found Me. Like I said, at this point, the band is basically a Dallon Week's solo project, which is actually kind of ironic because he was in Panic at the Disco, which became a Brendan Urie solo project after a while. From what I understand, former bandmate Ryan Seaman was accused by Dallon of kind of stealing a lot of money from him, but I don't even know if anything really came of that or if any concrete details were even released, so I'm not going to say anything more on it. Either way, a new album by Dallon is here, and it's pretty good. Unlike his last album, RAZZMATAZZ, this one is definitely lighter and more approachable in comparison. The quirky and slick indie pop stylings of that previous project have been largely smoothed over here in favor of some very shimmering pop rock and sort of synth pop sounds this time around. While the album is still very fun, I have to say, it does make it a bit less memorable than its predecessor. The songwriting is very clean and snappy, however, it can also be a bit undemanding of your attention at times, kind of breezing by at points. Still, despite that, there's some really great stuff on here though. The opening of the project, Downside, is a very energetic and bombastic first impression. The piano-focused pop rock is very vibrant, and the gritty bass tone has a nice complement to that piano as well. The verses are a great build-up to that sugary sweet chorus as Dallon describes himself being love-struck and ignoring any potential red flags in the person he's talking about. The vocals and lyrics have this vibe of bliss with an underlying hint of dangerous seduction that I think really rounds out the entire song. GLOOMTOWN BRATS is definitely very funk-driven in comparison, having a bouncy and punchy bass tone while also having these sort of like sarcastic guitar flourishes too. The song itself is very sarcastic and tongue-in-cheek, especially when Dallon delivers lines like "you just perpetuate expensive things in an upscale life with the rich girls in GLOOMTOWN." The song as a whole is largely a sort of social commentary on how a lot of people in the music business, or maybe just even entertainment business in general, often are very oblivious to the amount of privileges they have, whether that's in terms of money, looks, and beyond. The instrumental is almost a bit theatrical in a way, which provides a good emphasis on how many people within this lifestyle just don't even take things seriously that the average person definitely does have to take seriously just to stay afloat. Infatuation definitely makes a bit less of an impression, having a tropical curtain of horns and background vocals over a relatively simple drum kit. The chorus definitely sees all of these elements combined in a fairly luxurious way, but on the whole, I find this one to be a bit of a step backward, both in terms of instrumentals and just kind of drive and energy in general. It also doesn't really help that the lyrics on this track are kind of just a repeat of the first song on the project, but honing in a bit more on the obsession angle to it. It's not a bad song by any means, but it's also just kind of in one ear out the other. Next we get to the big single, What Love, and this is definitely a step back in the right direction with a very polished and clean synth pop sound, while also having these dramatic and sort of pining flourishes that make it stand out and also make it interesting. The progression in the drums and the synths are very compelling and chill, and I also think that the bass and guitar provide a very warm edge to round out the song. Dallon's vocals on this track especially are very expressive and striking, and that high note when the choir comes in, like, that's the good shit. It really just feels like it's doing what Infatuation tried to do, but better, more compelling and fleshed out, especially when Dallon delivers lines like, "Lord help me, I think I'm gonna cry, I guess I met you at the wrong time." I think it's that underlying sense of bittersweet feelings that really complete and make this song overall. Speak of the Devil is another banger, more reminiscent of Downside. They're really honing in on the pop rock and garage rock angle here, really focusing on the bass and reverb to create a sort of chaotic background of sound. The whole song is basically about expectations that are placed on a band or an artist to basically stay the same and how it just shackles their creativity, and I think the over-the-top nature of this track in a way kind of relates and really enforces how a lot of fans of bands can be pretty over the top in their complaints about a switch up in sound, saying things like, "Oh, I'll never listen to you guys again, you're dead to me," and stuff like that, when they're just trying something new, man. Overall, this one just kind of feels like cheeky fun, and I can get behind that. Next up, we get to 6 Feet. This is my favorite song on the record. I've had this shit stuck in my head for 3 days now. This is definitely most reminiscent of the previous album, RAZZMATAZZ, having a lot of things that made that album really really good, like the off-kilter synths and bass alongside the sort of like mischievous sounding guitar and melodies overall. The chorus is just so catchy, and Dallon's vocals are also going to some pretty neat places, especially when he delivers lines like overemphasize all these grandstanding gaslights, black eyes and fist fights, I romanticize all this. Pretense was meant to misrepresent you. Also, I have to say that line, don't push me around, I don't want to see you buried 6 feet underground, fuck around and find out, like, that is just delivered in such a satisfying way, like, I can't explain it. This song in particular, I think, captures a lot of what made RAZZMATAZZ so good. It's that perfect blend of really kind of like tongue-in-cheek and poignant lyrics while also having a sort of veil of catchiness around it as well, the veil of mischievousness around it, and kind of like a sense of betrayal too, like a lot of like sort of complex things packaged together to create a pretty intriguing song. Find Me slows it down a little bit, using distorted vocals and an off-kilter synth loop to kind of create a sense of desperation of Dallon trying to find someone who truly understands and wants to connect with him. The vocals on the chorus really sell this, and the in-your-face bass tone on this one really makes sure you're paying attention. The song just sounds like it's clamoring for someone, especially when all of these elements combine in the chorus to create this fuzzy wall of sound that Dallon almost just like disappears behind in a way. I think this disappearance also kind of showcases and highlights how it can be pretty tough to find someone genuine. Kiss and Tell is another pretty fun sounding track, having this after the party vibe to it that showcases essentially two people in a relationship realizing that neither of them were very good to each other. The guitar and piano especially have this melancholic touch to them that I think really adds to the feeling of a somber love song, especially in the chorus as it kind of just fully embraces this as a farewell. I think there's an underlying sense of bitterness to this track that also makes it a bit interesting too, especially in lines like, so go fight off all your demons, make sure you'll find someone to keep, until then you can dream of me in your sleep. I will say though that the last leg of the project does feel like it loses steam just a little bit. It's not bad, but does feel noticeably less interesting than what came before it. A Letter is basically a remix of the Brobeck song of the same name, which is a band that Dallon also leads. The instrumental is fine, however it feels a bit unfitting for the album as a whole, opting for a more indie rock direction instead, which kind of makes it stand out in a weird way. The bells definitely add at least a bit of uniqueness to it, but the spoken word lyrics by Matt Glass here just kind of make it sound like an extended intermission, so it just doesn't really make all that much of an impression on me. Satanic Panic is definitely a really great one though, opting for the pop rock and garage rock sounds that Speak of the Devil did. The whole song is a social commentary on the satanic panic of the 80s, with Dallon basically recalling how he was unable to do some fairly innocuous things just because they were arbitrarily labeled as bad or evil or satanic. The dramatic background synths alongside the punchy guitar create this sort of like fight for dominance, which I think represents the sort of chokehold that this ideology had on people in that time period, especially on like interests that were just totally innocent. It also really has this sort of tongue-in-cheek vibe, how like anything can be labeled evil as long as you get enough people to think that it is. Sunnyside is another more indie rock styled song, being fairly low-key while also still having a pretty fun groove and drive to it. I will say though that this one kind of feels a bit standard for the genre, not really having that quirkiness that I would expect from Dallon's work. The bass tones are clean and crisp, however it just doesn't really have that dramatic flair or just anything that makes it stand out compared to the other songs on the project, or really even songs in the genre as a whole. Still though, I will say that chorus with Will Joseph Cook is pretty catchy. Finally we get to Idiots of Oz, and it's an okay end. It does have the theatrics down, however there's something about it that just doesn't really hit me all that much. In a way it feels like it's kind of missing an element or something in the instrumental that really gives it the oomph that it needed. The vocals are fun and dramatic, although it's a bit lyrically plain I find, and it doesn't really get into any more interesting subject matter other than the sort of like, fuck you, I'm living my life how I want, you know? It's also a bit repetitive in this regard too. I really like how pronounced the bass and drums are on this track, but it's just not a very compelling instrumental, I find, especially as the end of the project, and to this effect, I also don't really feel like it summarizes the album's sound all that well either. It's still decent, and I do like the darker tone that it has, however, I can't help but feel like there could have been something a bit more to it. This was definitely a fun project by Dallon Weekes here, even if it's not as strong as its predecessor. The clean and punchy synth pop and pop rock stylings were pretty slick and fun, however, it came at the cost of really toning down the off-kilter and quirky nature of RAZZMATAZZ that I really liked about that album. As a result, this new sound is a bit less interesting and a bit more undemanding of your attention. However, there was also a lot of moments on here that really did use the sound to some pretty great effects. The lyrics are also mostly pretty good, however they can get a bit repetitive at times, especially on tracks like Idiots of Oz. Overall, this album showcased the thematic and vocal highlights that I've come to expect from Dallon at this point, and also honestly kind of exceeded them at points as well, but instrumentally I found it to be a bit of a step backward from the sort of off-kilter and interesting sounds from RAZZMATAZZ that I really liked. In a way, this was a very solid outing, but it was almost a bit too sanitized. All that being said though, I'm feeling a strong 7 on this newest album, but I don't know how, but they found me. Of course, you do stuff to talk about album covers on this show, and then I like this one album cover quite a bit, actually. I really like the composition of this one, with how the colors are very much segmented into blocks, almost. We have the orange building, the blue sky, and how vibrant they all are as well. I like how Dallon isn't really the focal point on this album. It's kind of just like the world is like expanding around him, kind of highlighting that feeling of isolation, loneliness, and maybe even a bit of a betrayal as well. I don't think it's the most interesting album cover, but I do like the sort of dynamic between smallness and bigness, the vibrant colors with Dallon being kind of muted. I think it's a pretty interesting one, at least. Of course, those are just my thoughts on this newest album. I don't know how, but they found me. What did you guys think? Do you think this was a pretty interesting next step for Dallon? Do you actually like how sort of slick and clean this album sounds? Or are you like me and you're kind of missing the quirky and off-kilter nature of RAZZMATAZZ a bit? Let me know. Be sure to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and I won't be gloomy anymore. And until the next one, farewell.